We'll go ahead and get started now that we have a quorum. Welcome to the Business Management Committee meeting. First up, we have the approval of the May 25th, 2023 committee meeting minutes. May I have a motion and a second? Okay, it looks like it's been moved and properly seconded. Any corrections or additions to the minutes? All right, seeing none, let's go ahead and take a vote. And the resolution passes. Next up on the agenda is a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for the procurement of the replacement of the computer-assisted dispatch and automated vehicle locator system, RFP P44859. Mr. Kirk Talbot, welcome to the podium.
Thank you very much, Chairman Williamson, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Srinath, and members of the Business Management Committee. Good morning. Next slide, please. This morning, I'm requesting authorization to award a contract to Clever Devices for the replacement of the bus CAD AVL system for MARTA. So that's the computer-aided dispatch automatic vehicle location system. The purpose of which is to let us track both from the rider's perspective, where are the buses, and from an operations perspective, where should the buses be, and manage that entire process. Next slide, please. Our current system was installed in the mid-2000s, and it's suffering from multiple issues, not only time and age, but also the fact that the technology was developed before smartphones. So you see a number of things that are out of sync with our current customers' expectations. Equipment is a higher failure rate. We have unreliable information at times on-time performance, which is an issue for operations. Currently, the system is designed to be able to pull where the buses are at every 2 minutes, which is very infrequent when you're looking at a bus trying to get updates. It's using older technology, which is a little slower and less resilient over a radio network. And we don't have the capability across the entire fleet to do some of the things that are critical for bus operations, such as turn-by-turn directions, so that we can give navigation and assistance to drivers that are driving routes. At this time, we can only implement that on 360 of our 584 vehicles that are slated for that capability. So we've got a mountain of issues with the current system, which is why we're coming to the board today asking for authorization to implement a new system. Next slide, please. Going through the process in May of 2021, we began the RFP process. We came to the board, asked authorization to solicit. We sent information to 20 firms. 159 firms showed interest by obtaining information online or through CDs. And we finally received in December 6 proposals from the firms you see listed here. Next slide, please. We went through the scoring and evaluation process for suitability and capability, and 3 proposals were considered to be the most competitive. Those firms are Clever Devices, NGO, Sys Trans USA, and Vontis, formerly known as Trapeze. That, in fact, is the name of, that is the system that we have in place now that we implemented in the early 2000s. Next slide, please. Each of the 3 firms went through the standard oral presentation process, but given the criticality of this system, we implemented a 90-day pilot working with operations. So each firm was given 1 bus yard with 10 vehicles. They installed their equipment, the solution that they're proposing, and they were given 90 days to operate so that both operations, ourselves technically, mechanics, everyone could take a look at the system and feel confident that the solution was in fact going to be viable. During that process, 1 firm was disqualified due to non-compliance with MARTA's Code of Ethics, and 2 firms then, the remaining 2 firms completed the 90-day pilot. The evaluation team scored not only the presentations, the proposals, but also the pilot results, and the top ranked firm was Clever Devices. Next slide, please. There's multiple benefits of this, and my intent is not to do a deep dive education on CAD AVL systems. And this is specifically the bus computer-aided dispatch automatic vehicle location. There's sometimes some confusion about the police computer-aided dispatch system, which we're in the process of implementing as well. So different systems. But many of the benefits of having a newer system are greater frequency, greater accuracy of information out to our customers about where the vehicles are located, more reliable communications capability, improved reliability of the underlying hardware so that our passenger counters are accurate and timely. Better automatic vehicle announcement information, because this is the system that drives the announcements on board and the head signs that state what route you're on, what the next stop is, those sorts of things. So better accuracy in the system leads to better outcomes for our customers. And not to be minimized, there are multiple benefits that accrue to the operations team, because now they will have a more advanced system that does a better job of tracking not only where the vehicles are at, but anytime there's an interruption in operations. So if there are detours, if there are vehicle breakdowns, the sorts of things that happen on a hour-by-hour basis, the system is designed to be able to help not only detect those, but route around those situations and then push out new and improved information about the performance to our customers. So it's a much better integrated system for customer expectations and bus operations. Next slide, please. Here's the meat of the request. So I am asking today respectfully for authorization to award contract to Clever Devices for an 8-year term. The way we've structured the contract is a 3-year base term with 5 one-year options. What that does is that puts incentive on the vendor to make sure that they continue to deliver a functioning system, they keep it up to date. They don't let it age, right? So by structuring it this way, it gives us more financial leverage over it. Total cost, as you see here, is $10,548,750 spread across this 8-year period of time. There are some minimal optional costs that were selected from the proposals, primarily to be able to remove existing equipment on the buses and to replace any pieces that might have not traditionally been supplied by this vendor but would be opportune at the time. It's a 2-year process, approximately 18 to 24 months to go through the entire fixed fleet, to pull out the existing equipment, put in the new equipment, all while continuing to run operations. Obviously, we can't take operations down for a minute, so what we have to do is we have to work through those buses that can be taken out of service for a night or a weekend, operate on those, put in the new equipment, and then rotate them back in. So we'll be operating the two systems in parallel during that 18 to 24-month period. Should state the Office of Diversity and Inclusion has assigned a 28% target for this procurement. And I don't know if Paula is available for details if it comes up, but the vendor has proposed a 21% participation rate, and it's deemed a good faith effort by the Department of Diversity and Inclusion. And I believe that's the last slide. Yes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Talbot. I will entertain a motion in a second to put this item on the table for discussion. All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. Any questions or comments for Mr. Talbot? Mr. Pond?
Question, Kirk. What are the expectations after the 5th year? Technology changes so much, and it's always helpful if you can modify and extend contracts. You have a large investment for that first period. There's really no right answer to this, being able to project 5 years from now. I'm just trying to get a sense for where you feel the technology is going. We have to go through all of this and replace everything 5 years from now.
That's an excellent question. So there's sort of two levels to it. One is the hardware. The hardware that gets installed is obviously has longer than a 5-year lifespan, or at least it's designed to. So we anticipate the hardware would not require a change out at the end of this contract, that we would continue to extend the relationship with Clever. So the capabilities of what can you do, can you bolt on additional things? So we would expect that we would continue to work with this vendor to enhance, upgrade, and improve that software over that lifespan and beyond the 8 years. Okay. Honestly, given the amount of effort that it takes, we don't like to replace these systems very often, but when the physical hardware ages out, that's typically when you see it.
And one other question, and you mentioned this at the beginning, but if I'm a frequent router, will I be able to look at my phone and see where the bus is?
Yes, sir. Yes. what this system will provide, in addition to more frequent updates about where the buses are at, better information, more reliability of that information, it will allow operations to be able to push out hour-by-hour changes. So when there's route changes and that sort of thing, that's something that we don't have that capability today. So the riders will get a better intelligence about what's actually happening out in the field and what to expect. So yes.
All right, Mr. Frierson.
Yeah, my question has to do with, will this also be installed on non-revenue vehicles?
No, sir. This
Okay.
is just for the fixed route buses.
Okay, okay. And then you mentioned that it's in compliance with the Breeze 2.0 that we're launching, and
Yes,
so
sir.
they'll be able to work in
Yes.
tandem with the information that they need.
Yes, sir. They're
Okay.
compatible technologies.
Great, great. This is a great opportunity to transfer this whole landscape. I know when we talked about trapeze years ago and allowed them to do some things in this space, I'm glad to see this is all being updated. So great.
Thank you.
Mayor Floyd.
Thank you. Couple of questions. Did you show the three pricing comparison? Is there between the three firms that you finally selected, was this the low number or was this the high number? Or was it, yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking.
I would have to turn to, I don't know if Jacqueline's here. I would have to turn to procurement for the breakdown on that piece. But since one firm was eliminated in the process, we only were looking at two firms at the end. And this was rated, since it's an RFP, it was a combination of both functional capability, stability of the corporation, a number of things in addition to pricing, but I do not remember at this time what the comparison
I
was.
always like to know how much I'm paying for something in regard to what somebody else might be charging.
Yes. I can say this without pulling the actual document. They were in comparable space. We weren't looking at orders of magnitude difference. And in fact, it was what we expected from our initial estimates.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry, I'm just being told we have the pricing now.
The prices were based on best value. This came in at a reasonable price, but like Kirk has mentioned, it was a combination of various things, including pricing, but it was based on the best value, not the lowest price.
Okay, so I'm not gonna hear the numbers then. Okay, thank you. That's close enough. The other question has to do with the reason for doing away with one of the firms. You said it was an ethics issue.
Yes, sir.
Is that something confidential, or can you share that with us?
I can state that it was a violation of an employee that had a conflict of interest with MARTA. So,
Okay, so it's something happened during the process of evaluation, not something you would have known at the time.
it was not something that we were aware of. We became aware of it in the middle of the evaluation, yes.
Okay, and this is a system that is put on the bus that communicates with MARTA the headquarters. Is there any way to send information to a bus driver or concerning issues with this system?
Yes, sir. One of the things I struggled with was not going too deep into the weeds because it's enjoyable to talk about the technology side of this. But what the driver sees is an interface, a tablet-like device inside the vehicle that tells them where their next turn is, what their on-time performance is, messages that come from dispatch. So yes, it is their link back to operations. So there's a large amount of information that could flow to the driver through the system.
Okay, and I guess the reason I quit I'm asking this is I know some of these body cam systems, allow, like, to send a picture of somebody. If there's something going on somewhere, you can advise something. So that capability is part of this system. I'm not necessarily that, but just some way to communicate with the driver of these vehicles about something going on.
Yes, we do have the ability, if I'm reading into what you're saying, the system does not come stock with the ability to push a photo of somebody that the driver needs to be looking for. But it does allow us to push a lot of information, and if that was something that became critical, we could potentially work with the vendor
Okay,
to
that's
add
what
that
I'm asking.
capability.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
It's a very flexible system.
Are there any other questions or comments on this item? All right, seeing none, let's go ahead and take a vote. I'm not seeing it on my screen.
My screen doesn't. All right.
No. Were you able to? Resolution passes. The next item is a resolution authorizing a modification in contractual authorization for contracts utilizing State of Georgia contracts and/or the Federal General Services Administration and State of Georgia contract for network, server, storage equipment, and professional services. Mr. Talbot, you're up again.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. This is a request to authorize additional dollars be authorized against a cooperative contract for us to purchase two items. One is entering into a contract with IBM to have maintenance and support on the storage that we came and spoke about, I believe it was last month or the month before. So this is a 3-year maintenance and support contract on our network storage system. The other component to this that we're looking for authorization to spend is for purchasing the equipment to allow us to build out the space next door at the Uptown building, the routers and switches, network components, and the CCTV hardware necessary to make that space viable. Next slide, please. MARTA entered into cooperative procurement structure back in March of 2017. You see the history here of the types of equipment and devices that we have purchased utilizing this contract. And today, if approved, I'm asking the board to authorize an extension of $3.1 million for the purchase of this maintenance contract and the equipment for next door. This will be utilizing underlying GSA and Georgia state contracts, which allow us to select procurements and contracts where there's either no competition, it's a single source, or there's really not opportunity in the market for a competitive sourcing, or it's non-productive. For that reason, the DBE goals have not been set on this by the Office of Diversity and Inclusion because they're utilizing the underlying GSA and Georgia state contracting. Next slide, we have the specifics. You see the current contractual authorization on this procurement mechanism. The IBM storage maintenance and support contract for 3 years is worth $2.4 million. And again, that's to provide maintenance support, upgrades, patches, security fixes, whatnot for our network hard drive. And the amount for the network server switches and CCTV equipment is $669,733. Again, utilizing the underlying GSA and Georgia contracts to purchase equipment. The new total authorization for this mechanism will bring us to $13.9 million utilizing this. And you see a breakdown here between local and capital funds. I believe that's it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Talbot.
Thank you.
I will entertain a motion and a second to put this item on the table for discussion. It's been properly moved and seconded. Any questions or comments for Mr. Talbot? Mayor Floyd.
Yeah, I'm sorry, one quick question. We're going to occupy both of these buildings, right? Is there a safe connection between these servers here and the servers over there? Is there a wired connection between
We
these
will
two
be putting in network connectivity between the two buildings. At this point in time, we do not have a direct path between the two buildings. One of the things that we're going to be doing from a construction standpoint is getting connectivity in.
Okay, that's not part of this contract, though, is it, to connect those buildings?
This is not the wiring portion, no. This is, once you have wiring, what do you plug the wires into to make everything work? That's what we're buying, is the equipment that we can plug into those wires.
Is that worth doing? I mean, what I just asked you, you said you were going to do it, but I'm asking the question now, is that worth, I mean, is security enough to come, I mean, is there enough information that flows between these two buildings or will flow
Oh, certainly, yes. Even if we did not connect that building to us, they still need to be able to get to email. They need to be able to print. We need to be able to pull camera feeds back to police. So any modern building, you have to have connectivity, right?
Yeah,
So,
but I'm talking about wired connectivity or not something that doesn't go through the internet, you know, something that
Oh.
goes directly.
it's, let me answer the technical question, then we can get to the construction piece of it. There's actually multiple ways that we connect our facility to that facility. Some are out to the internet, some are direct connections. It gets very complex very quickly, but it is important to have a wired connection. You couldn't run an operation like that off of just a wireless connection. And security-wise, yes, we don't want to have that data flowing unprotected, but I'll let Jax address it from a construction standpoint.
Hi, good morning, Jax Colgan. So to your question about the construction, we are going to be, it's going to be armored fiber. So there is a connectivity that's going to be secure through the fiber installation, which will be, we're under RFP right now. The process is in play to go through that fiber. That's why we're not talking about it today. But then it's going underground through the basement, so there's no access to get to the connectivity to the fiber that we're running across the street.
Thank you, and it very nicely told me you're probably not gonna understand this, you know.
Maybe.
The
Go ahead.
technical information you said, I'm talking about Kurt, you
okay.
said to me, you're not gonna understand this, but I'm gonna try to explain it to you anyway, so.
Oh,
That was, you did that very nicely.
well, thank you, but
Tag team,
that
right?
was not my intent, sir. No, no. No, it's just, it's hard because it gets complicated. There are many considerations, but it's critical to have that data flowing safely.
All right, seeing no further questions, let's go ahead and take a vote. Okay, resolution passes.
Thank you.
The next item is a briefing, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program Review by Ms. Paula Nash. Welcome, Ms. Nash.
Welcome. Good morning. Good morning, Chair Williamson, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Srinath, and members of the MARTA Board. I'm Paula Nash, and I'm going to be briefing you on the DBE program today. Next slide, please. So in this presentation, I'll cover a bit of a review of the DBE program, the purpose of the program, what is a DBE, those kind of things. I will also highlight the new overall DBE goal. And when I say highlight that, I will go into the methodology that we use to arrive at that goal and explain why we have to have a overall goal. And I want to point out that that part of the presentation is a part that the FTA actually requires that I present to you all. Every 3 years, we do have a new overall goal, and the FTA wants to make sure that you're aware of it and that you're aware of how we arrive at that goal. And then we will close it out with a discussion about race-neutral versus race-conscious and the split that the overall goal will have. Next slide, please. So we'll jump right into the DBE program review. Next slide, please. So the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, I want to start out saying, is a federal program. It requires that any recipients of federal funds who will be using those funds for contracting opportunities, those recipients are actually required to have a DBE program. Now, there are 4 key elements to a DBE program. The first being the program document, and that's a document that the FTA requires us to file with them, or requires any agency when you create a DBE program. It's a document that they want you to file with them that talks about the program, your policies and your procedures, covers whether your record keeping, and whether or not you are a certifying agency, a DBE certifying agency. That document was filed with the FTA when the program was first created, but we also update that document as needed. Now, the second key element is the goal-setting methodology. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. So I'm going to kind of skip that now, but we'll go into in-depth about the goal-setting methodology later. Third key element is monitoring and oversight, and that's really a compliance piece. It's not only making sure that we are making sure that goals are being met, but that we are actually certifying companies that meet the qualification, also that we are making sure that the DBEs that are subcontracts on contracts are actually doing commercially useful functions. We also look at that they're being paid promptly. So that kind of monitoring and oversight covers all those kind of things. And then the fourth key element is the semi-annual reporting. So every 6 months, my office does provide a report to the FTA. This report covers things like what federal contracts were awarded during that time period. We also provide payments that were made to DBEs during that time period as well. Next slide, please. So why is there a DBE program? The whole purpose of the government establishing a DBE program was to combat discrimination and the long-lasting effects of past discrimination. So the main objectives of the DBE programs are to eliminate discrimination in the awards of contracts, to create a level playing field for DBEs to compete fairly for contracts, to help remove barriers to participation for DBEs on contracts, and to provide appropriate flexibility to recipients of federal financial assistance in establishing and providing opportunities for DBEs. Now, I like to, when I talk about the purpose of the DBE program, I like to also explain what the program is not. Because some people don't understand what it doesn't cover. So the DBE program does not have quotas. It's not a quota program. It doesn't have set-asides. There's no guarantees that just because a firm becomes DBE certified that they will get on a contract as a DBE. And then there's no minimum participation. Next slide, please. So what is a DBE? DBE is a small business with at least 51% ownership held by an individual who is socially and economically disadvantaged. And this does include women-owned firms. That individual also has to manage the daily operations, or what we call, they have to control the business. That's important because every now and then we will get companies that apply for DBE certification where the owner is 51% socially and economically disadvantaged, but when we look at that control aspect, they are not the individuals controlling that company, which in that case we are required to deny DBE certification to that company. So it's not an automatic certification. The business has to be a for-profit business. The owner has to be a U.S. citizen or lawfully admitted resident. There are small business administration size standards, and those kind of vary according to industries. But these next two things are some of the most key points of DBE certification. Gross receipts cannot exceed $28.48 million for DBE firms, or $56.42 million for ACDBE firms. And also, the personal net worth cannot exceed $1.32 million. And I point out those two things because that's what tends to make this program different from your like minority business enterprise program or MBE program or female business enterprise program, is that they don't have those particular economic requirements to them. These numbers are set by the US DOT. Next slide, please. So sometimes you see as people come up here and present that there is a zero goal set to particular procurements. And so I want to explain a little bit about why sometimes we have a zero goal. Essentially, these are the reasons that we have zero goals. There's a lack of DBEs in the certified scope of work or in that identified industry that we're looking at, in which case we will set a zero goal. Sometimes we're getting the procurement off of the state of Georgia or the GSA schedule, in which case we set a zero goal there because it's already on a different contract. If it's a sole source, and I should say also we do this for single source. If it's a sole or single source, it would require a zero goal because, and the reason for that is that doesn't go through a formal competitive process. And transit vehicle manufacturer procurements also have a zero goal. The reason being, and for transit vehicle manufacturers, I mean those companies where we get our buses and our rail cars, they are required to have their own DBE program filed with the FTA. And as such, they kind of set a overall goal with the FTA, and what the FTA provides us when we do use transit vehicle manufacturers for rail cars or buses, they provide us with a letter that says that that company has satisfactory provided their DBE program to the FTA and has met the goal. So we just get that letter from the FTA. And then the last reason is when there are no subcontracting opportunities for DBE. The program, the guidelines of the programs do say that if there are no subcontracting opportunities, then the goal, there should be no goal on that procurement. Next slide, please. So here's the part of the presentation that the FTA requires me to bring to you all, and that is the overall DBE goal and the methodology of how we got there. Next slide, please. So every 3 years, the FTA requires recipients of FTA funds to submit a proposed DBE goal based on the FTA's mandated methodology. MARTA's proposed goal is due August 1st, 2023. The DBE goal represents the level of minority participation that would be expected absent discrimination. So sometimes you'll hear me say overall goal, or you might hear me say 3-year agency goal, or people refer to those two terms. They mean the exact same thing. Next slide, please. So to start out, the methodology for coming up with the overall goal, we first look at anticipated projects for that particular period. For us, the period is federal fiscal year 2024, which starts in October of 2023, and it goes through federal fiscal year of 2026. And I worked with the Office of Grants as well as Capital Programs to come up with anticipated projects that were federally funded or would have federal funds that we would award during that time period. So these projects aren't anything that have come to you before. They can't be past awarded projects. They are projects that will get awarded during that time period. Doesn't mean they'll be completed during that time period, but awarded during that time period. So there are 13 projects that were identified, and here are the first 8. And I want to point out for those of you all that saw an earlier version of this presentation, there were 14 projects initially. One project was removed because it was determined that it wasn't very likely that it would happen during the identified time period. So there are 13 projects. These are the first 8. Next slide, please. And these are the remaining projects. Also, there is the potential FTA share. It isn't the money that we have right now, but this is kind of what we believe that we will get for those particular projects. So after we look at the projects, go back. Next slide, please. So for the methodology, we must choose the geographic area where we will obtain all of our data. For MARTA, generally the geographic area is based on where you spend the majority of your money. So for MARTA, we chose Fulton, DeKalb, Clayton, Cobb, and Gwinnett. We also have to look at what databases or what data sources we will use for the methodology. And the data sources are the North American Industry Classification System codes. We also use the 2021 U.S. Census Bureau data and the Georgia Unified Certification Program directory, or I've referred to as the DBE directory. Next slide, please. So the mandated DBE goal methodology is actually a 2-step process. The first step involves a mathematical equation which will get us the baseline availability, and then the second step involves a determination of whether or not that goal or that baseline availability needs to be adjusted. Next slide, please. So looking at the first step, and let me just say this is a high-level kind of Cliff Notes version of how we got to this, of the steps to the methodology. First, we determine the ready, willing, and able DBEs, and we get this information from that DBE directory. They have to be within our market area that we identified earlier, and they have to be performing the same industries or using the same industry codes, which is why we use the North American Industry Code System. Then we take all of the firms that are within those same industry codes in the same market area, and we divide the DBE firms by all firms, and that gets us to our baseline or our work type availability. Here it was 22.73 based on the projects that we use broken down into industry codes for all of those projects. Then what the FTA likes us to do is use the most narrowly tailored model of availability that we can, and strongly recommends that this should be done by weighting the actual work type availability. And so when I say weighting, what we do is we take the actual anticipated FTA funds and multiply that by the breakdown of the industry codes, the DBE availability within the industry codes, and we come up with our actual total goal. And here, our overall goal is going to be 24%. But on the next slide, I'm going to show you kind of what that looks like. Next slide, please. So here we've taken two industries, and you have the certified DBE number, and then you have all vendors. And so we divide the certified DBEs by all vendors to get the work scope availability percentage. Then we multiply that by the work scope amount, or the percentage of FTA funds for that particular industry, to come up with a certified work scope amount. The sum of all of that gets divided by the total federal funds anticipated to come up with the percentage. And so we do this for all, here there were 32 different industry codes. So we do that for all the industry codes. As you can see, there were over 10,000 vendors. If we combine them all for all industry codes, there were over 2,300 certified DBEs. And then what we have as the anticipated projected funds, FTA funds, is 517 million, over 517 million. So using all those numbers is how we came up with the 24%. And this is just an example. Next slide, please. So after we do step one, then we have to determine if an adjustment should be made to that number. The FTA does not mandate adjustments. They are not required, but if you do one or if you don't do one, you have to explain to them how you arrived at deciding that you should or should not have an adjustment. Some of the considerations that the FTA wants you to look at for adjustments are a disparity study, if you have one, which MARTA has not done a disparity study. What we looked at were the actual historical data or past performance, and we looked at current projects. And by that, next slide, please. Looking at the historical data, which is the last 5 years of our DBE goal and the achievement that we've made for the last 5 years. The blue line is the overall goal, and the orange is the achievement. You can see that we have exceeded our goal all 5 years of the last 5 years. Normally, this would actually rate for an adjustment, but the second thing that we have to look at are the current projects or the projected projects. And because the projected projects in this particular methodology are a little different or considerably different than the ones we used for this historical data, we were not able to do an adjustment, or the recommendation is no adjustment. The projects have to be fairly similar for us to use an adjustment based on that means. So the difference in the projects here are our BRT projects. If you recall, there were several of those on the project list, and also the automated fare collection 2.0, which was something that was not included in those historical years that we looked at. With those projects being a bit different, there were different industry codes used, and that kind of makes a big difference in comparing the two. Next slide, please. So with no adjustment, it leaves us at 24%. The next thing that is required is that we break it down to what will be obtained through race-neutral means and what will be obtained through race-conscious means. Now, race-neutral is essentially not putting a goal on a contract. Race-conscious is when we actually do put a goal on a contract. the FTA requires that the recipient must meet the maximum feasible portion of the overall goal through race-neutral DBE participation, and then the remainder through race-conscious. So race-neutral can be when we award a contract to a DBE prime, that counts as race-neutral. A race-neutral can be if we put a goal on a contract, but the vendor actually exceeds that goal in their commitment. Say we put a 20 goal and the vendor says, well, I'm going to do 25%. That 5% would count as race neutral. Or if we put no goal on the contract and then the vendor actually proposes a goal anyway, then that goal would be considered race neutral. So our race neutral breakdown, and again, the race neutral breakdown is based on past participation, looking at what we have achieved over our goal and also what we have achieved based on using DBE primes or through race neutral means in the past. And based on that, the race neutral split here will, for the forecasted federal fiscal years 24 through 26 will be 8% race neutral and 16% race conscious. Lastly, the FTA does require that we actually publicize this proposed DBE goal, and you can find that on our website. We also are required to have meetings with DBEs as well as primes about the new proposed goals. We have one coming up next week where we will be doing a How to Do Business with MARTA webinar. It'll be a virtual meeting, a webinar, where we'll have different DBEs there learning about doing business with MARTA, but we will also go over the proposed goal, some of the same methodology that you saw here today. Next slide, please. So lastly, I just want to mention that we have some videos on MARTA's website that actually highlight some of our DBE success stories. I think it's important when we're talking about this program to talk about how important the program is to DBEs and how some of them have really been extremely successful with this program. So there are a couple of videos on the website, and I just want to encourage you to take a look at those. They're on MARTA's website, and they're under the Diversity and Inclusion page. Right now, there are two of them up there. One is Albert Edwards, who's the owner of the DBE firm CERM. And as many of you know, CERM has been a subcontractor as well as a joint venture on many MARTA projects for many years. The other video features Sheila Jordan, who's the owner of Knowledge Architects, also a long-time subcontractor on MARTA projects. And in fact, one of the projects that she's a subcontractor on is our new rail car project. Next slide, please. So next steps will be for my office to submit the proposed DBE goal and the methodology data to the FTA. We have to give the complete data. The FTA, like when you were back in school and they said you had a math problem and they said, we want to see the work, show your work. We have to show our work so that they can review all of that. And we have to submit that to the FTA by August 1st, 2023. Then we will await FTA's review and approval. In the meantime, while we're waiting, if we have not received the review or approval by October 1st, which is the beginning of the federal fiscal year, we will operate, MARTA will operate with the new proposed goal. Next slide, please. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this in-depth presentation. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Ms. Nash? Ms. Scott?
Yes, my question is on page 12, I believe it is. I am trying to understand why MARTA is designating or considering the FTA dollars assigned to Cobb and Gwinnett.
So yes, so we consider, it's not we use the market area by where the DBE firms are located. So it's where the majority of the DBE money goes. And so for us, that's why those counties are included, because the lion's share of our money goes to these 5 counties.
And just to clarify, Paula, doesn't mean MARTA's money. It's the overall spend in the community. It's not MARTA's money going to those areas. They're not in our budget for expansion. We
Right,
haven't
right,
spent
that's why I
money
was
in expansion.
asking, because
And so
I
the
knew
theory is that
Cobb
they,
and Gwinnett were not in the budget for MARTA.
Yes,
But
that is,
this shows where the overall funding will go, and it's split between the 5 those counties.
it's where the primes get their DBEs from.
I got it.
So the majority of the DBEs are in this area, so the majority of the funds going to the DBEs are in that area.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Worthy?
Ms. Nash, I know, and this isn't directly related to your presentation, but I know that MARTA is a certifying agency for other DBE firms, even if they're not doing business with MARTA. You along with the DOT certifies these agencies, and I think the breakdown is everything in Metro Atlanta you certify, and then DOT certifies everything else, or?
We certify everything in Fulton, DeKalb, and Clayton in our service area.
Okay.
And then the Georgia DOT certifies everything else.
What's your volume on that?
Wow. Wasn't prepared to answer that today, but the volume, we tend to get in about, and so there's 2 types of certifications. There's the new applications, and then there are renewals. So we tend to get in a combination of the 2, over 100 a month.
Wow, okay. I was just curious. I know I think that it's important, but I also view that as a workload on top of you guys that isn't directly related to MARTA all the time.
Yes, that is correct.
And going in order here, Mr. Pond?
Looking at your 5 years of history, good results there. My question is, and I think 4 or 5 months ago you were in front of this group talking about this. What are we doing when you have these goals established in these contracts, and then the contracts start, and 3, 4, 5 years later, people are not meeting their numbers? I guess there are 2 parts of that. Is what are we doing to monitor that and communicate back to the contract holders? And number 2, what are we doing about it to turn that around? for
Good
that
question.
contract and future contracts?
Yes, I appreciate that question. So, and you are correct, I was here a few months ago and we kind of addressed that. Since that time period, we have gotten some additional staff. So what we have done is increase our monitoring of those contracts to try to make sure that, we're catching those that may have been slipping through the cracks before at an earlier period, so that we can get with the actual firm and let them know you're falling short of your goal. What are your plans to correct this? So the first thing we do, monitoring, and once we catch that, is we ask for a corrective action from the firm, and also ask them, why is it that you've fallen short? Because sometimes there is a reason. They may tell us, oh, one of the DBE firms has dropped out of the contract. We usually know when that has happened, but sometimes a DBE firm gets bought out, and so now they are no longer a DBE. So different things happen. So we try to find out from them if there is a reason that this has happened, and then the corrective action. So if a DBE firm is no longer able to be used, is there something that the remaining firms that they have identified can do to take on that work? Or if not, are there other DBEs that they can bring in? But we try to stay on top of that at a earlier period so that we can address that with the firms.
Mayor Floyd?
Yeah, on page 5, under the big red X, it says no minimum participation. What is the difference in that and a 25% goal?
So the no minimum participation means that we don't actually, we're not requiring the firms, because it is a goal, we're not actually requiring them to have a certain amount of participation, because it is a goal. But once they do commit to something, then we actually do hold them to that commitment, because that then becomes a part of the contract.
Okay, thank you. And it's probably the oldest guy in the room. I've watched this program, Minority Business Enterprises, and go from the mid-1970s in the water and industry to where we are today. And I mean, the dramatic changes, and I know it's got a long ways to go. But one of the things we struggled with back then, and we talked about this 4 or 5 years ago at MARTA, was small minority businesses that are week-to-week type businesses.
Right.
That we may want to help improve. And we talked about a program of where they can get paid weekly and they get some sort of support on a basis. Does MARTA still do that in any way now, or is that a responsibility of the prime contractor? So we're not doing that anymore then, right?
No, that's a responsibility of the prime. So MARTA doesn't actually pay the DBEs, unless we have a contract with the DBEs. There are some that are DBE primes, but otherwise we don't actually pay the DBEs, but we require the primes to have a prompt payment clause within their contract. So we do require that, and ours is that they get paid within 10 days of receiving payment from MARTA.
It's still a monthly, probably, isn't it? Aren't you on a monthly pay?
So if they're getting paid monthly from MARTA, then yes, it would be, and then within 10 days of that payment, they're required to pay the DBE. So it could very well still be a monthly thing. Now, there are some DBE firms, and this is one of the things that we do encourage. Even though we have a provision, our prompt payment provision says that the prime pays them when paid by MARTA, they can actually negotiate a better payment provision for themselves. And there are many primes out there that actually do pay DBEs even prior to being paid by MARTA, that they have better provisions in the contract. And I can think of one in particular that an invoice is submitted by the DBE every 15 days, so twice a month for payment.
All right, as we get into this construction program, we're going to deal, I think, with a lot of small minority and disadvantaged businesses. And it seems to me we need to concentrate on a way to make sure those people get an opportunity, because, a lot of these guys are working out of their pickup truck or whatever, and they need some help and support. And there are people who are just trying to, keep food on the table. We need some way, in my opinion, to support those guys, especially the disadvantaged business people that are trying to make it. And I don't know what I'm recommending to you, but I just think we need to keep in mind that, I see these minimum receipts, $50 million a year, to qualify for this program, and that, the people I'm thinking about,
don't come near to that.
They're never going to see $50 million. They're not going to see $50 maybe, but I just think we need to keep in mind some way to encourage these people and support them and encourage them to participate in our contracts. somehow.
Yes.
And a lot of small businesses, especially guys that do $500,000 or $1 million a year, are scared away from MARTA because of the complexity of what it is. And it you know, it happens that time. So I don't know what I'm suggesting to you other than that I think we need to continue to do that in some way, shape, or form.
I definitely understand, and that's noted. We do meet with other agencies that have DBE programs, and that is what you have just raised is a common conversation that we have, and how to fix that type of issue. I can't say that even in the meetings with the other agencies that we've come up with something definite to fix it, but that is a continuing conversation and with ideas of different things that may be able to try out. And so as those things come up, we will see what we can implement here.
Paula, do you think, I recall sitting in on one of your DBE roundtable sessions, and there are conversations like this about what we can do to make the landscape better for DBE, large and small. And I don't remember the details, but I remember you and Carrie had brought something forward as a result of those conversations, that it made billings easier, it made true-ups better, it made life a lot better for the DBE. Do you remember the details of that effort?
Yes, so it was through our OLIS system, our online invoicing system, and if I get it wrong, Carrie, you can help me out here. But it was, one of the issues was that DBEs, because they put their invoices into the primes, and it's the primes that then put an invoice into our OLIS system for payment from MARTA. And DBEs could not see when their invoice was actually submitted or if it was included in the prime's invoice. So they had no way of telling when the payment might be coming. And so some changes have been made to the OLIS system, so now DBEs can actually follow their work or their invoice through the process. Did I get that correct? Yes.
All right, Ms. Scott?
Yes, my question is in regards, it was going to be along the lines of Mr. Pond, so thanks for asking that question. How does DBE versus DEI?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
How is MARTA looking at DBE and DEI?
Okay. So they kind of go hand in hand, but the DBE is a separate program that is geared towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, that's kind of the core of the DBE program, is that we're looking to make, to get as many diverse contractors in here as possible, that we're trying to go for, we want to have an equal playing field. So, and obviously inclusion by, they're looking at the disadvantaged portion of it, includes the societal disadvantage or socially disadvantaged, which really breaks down to race and gender. So they really go very hand in hand. The DBE program is a early form of a DEI type program.
Right, and I guess my question is along the lines of the infrastructure bill.
Oh, mm-hmm.
And how specifically when we look at funds, that it also includes equity,
Yes.
not only along the lines of DBE, but being equitable to all of the jurisdictions. And so are we considering that as well? When we look at DBE, we're also looking at equity, DEI?
Yes, we are. We look at that. As I said, we pull our actual DBE vendors from different jurisdictions, but obviously the directory is made up of all of Georgia, but we try to emphasize local area DBEs to be used on projects.
So we're making sure that our programs are equitable throughout our jurisdiction.
We do, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Frierson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Nash. I had a question concerning the DB directory that you mentioned.
Yes.
Is that something that's visible so that other businesses that want to try to find that place where they can do business, they can see competitors that are on the list and kind of find a way to be added?
Yes. So the DBE directory is visible. It's online. You get to it through GDOT's website because they are the kind of owners of the DBE directory. So when we certify a firm, we pass that information to GDOT. They actually enter the firm onto the directory. Same thing if a firm is decertified, that information would get passed on to GDOT. So it is actually on their website.
Okay, thank you.
And you mentioned the webinar next week, the How to Do Business webinar. How do we gain access to it? The link or the flyer, is that on your website?
It is on the website, yes. It's on MARTA's website up under diversity and inclusion. The webinar is June 29th.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments related to this item? Okay, thank you, Ms. Nash.
Thank you.
And our last item is for informational purposes only. It is the FY23 May Consolidated Financial Highlights and Financial KPIs. Everyone received that in their packet for review. With no further business, this concludes the Business Management Committee meeting. Thank you.
Programs Committee meeting for Thursday, June 22nd of 2023. First, I'll ask for approval of the May 25th, 2023 Planning and Capital Programs minutes. If I can have a second. If everyone can vote. All right, the motion passes. We'll now move to the resolution authorizing the award of a contract for the procurement of architectural and engineering design services in support of Atlanta Streetcar East Extension Project, AE 50293. Mr. Josie.
Okay, good morning, Chair Powers.
Good morning.
Vice Chair Powers, Mr. Greenwood, Ms. Rocha, and members of the committee. I'm going to start, next slide, please. I'm going to start by just providing a little bit of history on how we got to this point. January of this year, we came before the Planning and Capital Programs Committee to discuss how we were going to procure these services. So we actually went with a qualified-based procurement and to solicit firms to help us with the infrastructure, architecture, and engineering final design services selection for the Atlanta Streetcar extension. Then we came before this committee in April, or actually in March, and then the board approved in April a locally preferred alternative alignment. More recently, in May, we actually had 3 qualified statements that came in, and we pulled together a source evaluation committee that then made an independent evaluation of these 3 proposals and then selected or shortlisted 2 of the firms. And more recently, this week, we actually had oral presentations from those 2 firms and have come up with a final recommendation. Next slide, please. So this project is actually part of the MARTA Atlanta program. This procurement is for the procurement of professional architectural and engineering design services to provide final design bid documents so that we can construct the Streetcar East extension. And specific subject matter expertise that we're looking for on this particular program is for project management, architectural engineering design services for both systems and for infrastructure, and safety certification services, public engagement services, as well as utility services. Next slide, please. So the A&E services are going to be approximately $11.5 million based on 30% design estimates. The term will have a 4-year base term with a 1-year option for extension. Total construction cost based on, again, 30% estimates is approximately $115 million, and total project cost is for $230 million. Currently, our procurement schedule, we are targeting the start of final design services in July of 2023. Next slide, please. And so the SEC recommends the approval of a resolution authorizing the general manager, CEO, or his delegate to enter into a contract for the procurement of final design services for the Streetcar East Extension AE 50293 with HDR. HDR is going to be serving as the prime. They are supported by Axis Infrastructure, VHB, the collaborative firm, which is a DBE firm, C2G, Aulic, Facet, Luminor, PCS, Acura, Perez Planning, and the Sycamore Group. I'm happy to say that the diversity inclusion had set a goal of 26% for this program, and HDR is committed to exceeding this goal with a 30% goal. Next slide, please. So with this, I'd like to request for approval of the resolution authorizing award of a contract for the procurement of architectural and engineering design services in support of Atlanta Streetcar East Extension Project AE 50293. Thank you.
All right. Can I have someone move for approval of that resolution? Looks like we have a move and a second. Any questions? Mr. Pond.
I've got a question, not so much for the procurement, because you've gone through a very involved process, and maybe this is a question more for Kali or Carrie, but we're spending, this is not a mega project, but it's a large project. Will we require federal funding to construct this? Because with the volume of ridership, I would question whether federal funding would even be realistic. But I'm just throwing that question out. Are we thinking 2 years in advance, how are we going to fund this?
Yeah, so we are not seeking federal funding on this project. There's been a little bit of discussion in terms of procurement of vehicles to potentially look at procuring vehicles under a separate grant program, but there is no federal funding being pursued for this.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Worthy.
Can you talk a little bit more about the public engagement part of this? Because I think that all of us on the board have obviously shown our desire to move forward with this project, but I think that there are, I think we've all heard from opponents of this project and committed to them to learning more and learning what we don't know. I think public engagement is very important part of that. So can you talk about the public engagement part of this bid?
Yeah, so we actually, during the oral interviews, we actually did focus in on public engagement because we know the sensitive nature of this project and the they're going to take a multifaceted approach. The collaborative firm actually did present, and HDR actually has a strategy team in place that's going to set up an office along the corridor. So there's going to be a lot of conversations specifically about making sure that we meet everybody's viewpoint and having one-on-one sessions. We're going to have websites set up, public engagement events set up during design. We are going to do a very proactive approach. This is one of the key elements of this particular procurement, is that we wanted to know that you're going to have a multifaceted approach, being that we have so many different points of contention, potentially points of contention, and other things that we've heard specifically from this team is that they have been doing this around the country, and they have had to go through these same conversations with 8 of the 9 current streetcars that are being implemented for delivery, I think by 2028. This particular team is involved in 8 of 9 of those deployments. So they are having those conversations and are pulling from their experiences from around the country. And that's one of the reasons, one of the main reasons we selected this particular firm.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
All right, if there are no other questions, if we can please vote. All right, the resolution passes. Next, we'll hear about the
Madam
resolution.
Chair, I think there was a vote that was probably overlooked. Mrs. Jones,
I'm sorry, what
if
did you-
Mrs. Jones' information did not come up. Okay.
well, I see it on the second. Yeah, I see it on my second chair my second screen to the right.
You do?
So it
Okay.
shows passed.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the resolution authorizing the award of a contract for the single source procurement of bus shelters for Cleveland Avenue ART and Metropolitan Parkway ART projects, RFP P50364.
Okay. Next slide, please. So again, I'm going to give a little bit of background on the project itself. This is part of the MARTA Atlanta program. A portion of this alignment is part of the MARTA Atlanta program. And this is going to be the first implementation of arterial rapid transit in our region. So with arterial rapid transit, or ART, we intend to provide faster service, improved amenities, and safer pedestrian access. The routes themselves, just a brief description, Cleveland Avenue ART is going to have an east to west orientation. It starts at East Point Station, traverses eastward to Jonesboro, along Jonesboro Road to a newly installed cul-de-sac that's going to be part of this program as well, where it's going to terminate at the east end of Cleveland Avenue. Metropolitan ART has a northwest orientation. We'll start at West End Station, and it'll traverse along Metropolitan Parkway to Cleveland Avenue, and there's a turnaround there at the Walmart Shopping Center along Springdale Road. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of what we are trying to ask for here. MARTA currently has Tolar's Signature Series model bus shelter. We have about 970 of these installed at our local bus stops over the past 11 years. And Tolar was the only manufacturer that we had submitted to the City of Atlanta's Urban Design Commission at the time of the local bus stops that met their design criteria and were approved. So piggybacking off of that effort, we are using similar shelters so that we can help with our scalability, our asset management, maintainability, and procurement lead times by utilizing the same Tolar shelters, just a larger 16-foot width shelter as opposed to the 10-foot width that we have currently for our local bus stops. The proposed ART bus stop shelters will have enhanced amenities to improve ridership experience, which I'll go into on the next slide. So some of the amenities that you're going to see is we start from the left. We will have solar panels that will be powering. 72% of our shelters are going to be powered by solar panels. They're going to be on a 12-foot vertical stanchion, as you can see there. We will have a branded stop marker. Real-time arrival information will be on electronic signage that's on that platform. Again, the shelter itself is about 16 feet wide. We are going to have trash recycle bins, seating, and we're going to have branded bicycle racks as part of this procurement. Next slide. A little bit more about the real-time arrival signage. It is going to be an e-paper screen, so we're trying to get a little bit more contrast for readability. But in addition to having those screens, we are going to have an enunciator button for our visually impaired patrons. That'll be right next to the screen itself. Next slide, please. So the scope of this procurement is for 56 shelter assemblies, amenities, spare parts, and a training program for solar panel installation. In addition, we are going to have a 3-year technical support services in place for the real-time arrival signs. The amount of this procurement is for $3,368,878. The schedule, the way that we're going to do this is going to go in parallel to our contract procurement for construction. So we are going to do this shelter procurement. Subsequent to that, we're going to create a prototype or have the manufacturer create a prototype. We'll have a first article inspection, and then we'll start receiving those shelters. And we're going to have them in a laydown area here in town. Parallel to that, we are doing a contract procurement, and then we're targeting construction in October of 2023 for operational system by March of 2025. Next slide, please. So with that, we are asking for a resolution authorizing the award of contract for the single source procurement of shelters for Cleveland Avenue ART and Metropolitan Parkway ART projects, RFPP P50364. Thank you.
All right. I would ask for a motion of approval of the resolution. And a second. All right. Questions, Ms. Jones?
Yes, so in this scope, you talk about a training program. Can you speak more to that? Who can participate? When will it launch?
It will be with our operations team, so for the actual installation of the solar panels themselves. So that training program will be for our operations team to be able to do maintenance, any kind of O&M on those particular the solar panels themselves. Yep.
Mr. Pond.
Question not so much about the design of this contract, but these are upgraded stations to improve the experience. So who will look after these, picking up trash, keeping them clean, making them pleasant to be around versus the smaller bus stops? Is that a MARTA or a local jurisdiction?
So we have Outfront Media is our current contractor that is helping with our existing local stops. We're going to be piggybacking off of that contract effort to just continue with these shelters as well. So Outfront Media would be the contract that would be responsible for that. Now, when it comes to the signage itself, the signage is going to be supported by this contract.
Now, I think maybe I misunderstood you. I'm not talking about, I'm saying, once these stations are in place,
Mm-hmm.
are the jurisdictions going to be responsible, will MARTA be responsible for those stations, no different than a train station from a maintenance standpoint?
Yeah, today, with some of our stations, I think you're referring to the conditions we're in right now. So we have like multiple jurisdictional responsibilities for some of these stations. In some areas, it's quite clear, and in others, it's predicated by a phone call to say who's going to come and deal with this. So what AJ is saying is built into this contract is we're going to give a stronger role to the contractors that get these construction jobs to continue that maintenance on an ongoing basis. We also have, we're starting early conversations with the city of Atlanta in particular to strike a deal with them in terms of how they can better assist us with the shelters inside of their area. But when it comes to these other jurisdictions, we plan to give the contractor a larger role. AJ, is that consistent with what you had in mind?
That's correct.
Mr. Worthy.
AJ, I should know the answer to this question, but I know that ART is different than BRT and not quite as extensive as BRT, but I know that ART is more than a bus route. Do these stations, will they have names similar to BRT, or will they be station numbers more like a bus route?
It's going to be similar to a local bus route. Yep.
Mayor Floyd.
Replacing any existing shelters, I don't know if there's an overlap. I don't believe so, because these are going to be far side stops. I don't believe so. These are all going to be new.
So when we do this, these 36 are all new places where they're not shelters presently, these stops. Are these stops different than the stops we're using now then?
Yes, they are. They are. We're going to be utilizing TSP, doing far side stops in most cases. These are going to be different stop areas, yes.
What is TSP?
Transit signal priority.
Okay.
So very similar to BRT, where you basically have signalization that's going to coincide with the buses themselves.
But these local buses are still running down these roads, right?
I believe so. There is an overlap. Jax?
Hi, Jax Colgan. The existing routes are going to stay in place until the network redesign is developed so that they will coordinate the efforts.
Okay, do they use the same route? Do they drive in the same lanes that these
They
buses
will,
do?
yes,
They
it'll
do,
be,
don't they?
it'll be common traffic lanes,
Okay.
yes.
So, but we'll have different, do you identify, if you have a shelter for a regular stop and a shelter are they identified somehow or just by
Yes.
the look?
Yes, well, they'll be much larger, and then we're going through a branding effort as well, similar to BRT. We're going through an ART branding effort, and we will be combining some shelters together, and that's where the real-time arrival messaging comes into play. We're going to be advertising the ART stops as well as the local stops that are sharing a bus route.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if there are no further questions, if everyone will please vote. All right, the resolution passes. Next, we will have a briefing on the Kensington Station Master Plan. Ms. Frank.
All right. Good morning, Vice Chair, I'm sorry, I'm elevating you there, Vice Chair Powers.
Please don't.
General Manager Greenwood, Ms. Rocha, and the committee board members. I'm Debbie Frank, Director of Transit-Oriented Development at MARTA, and I am so pleased to be here standing before you today to give a briefing on the Kensington Station Master Plan. It is actually one of 4 master plans that we're undertaking this year. Next slide, please. I just have to say that we had an unbelievable consulting team leading this effort for us, led by Perkins and Will, and we have Sarah McCullough here today joining us for this presentation to the board. The community engagement was led by Sycamore Consulting. All the transportation matters were handled by Kimberly Horn and HNTB. And we rounded it out with Noel Consulting Group and HRA Advisors undertaking a market analysis for us. Next slide, please. The Kensington Master Plan target area is the 35 acres you see here highlighted in yellow. It's bound by Mountain Drive to the north, Memorial Drive to the east, Kensington Road to the south, and Covington Highway to the west. And in addition to going through the master planning process, we were also seeking a rezoning of these 35 acres. And if you recall, back at the height of the pandemic, we were seeking to rezone this property to advanced transit-oriented development. And at that time, the DeKalb County Board of Commissioners really requested that we complete a master plan just to make sure we get it right, the zoning right, and that it presented an opportunity for. We have some great things to show you here shortly. Next slide, please. So on April 11th, not April 1st, April 11th, the DeKalb County Board of Commissioners approved MARTA's application for rezoning, where we rezoned the property to MU5. That's the highest mixed-use district in DeKalb County, and that will support the level of mixed-use development we would want to see within a transit-oriented development at the station. And I do want to thank Commissioners Bradshaw and Terry, as well as the Planning Department, the Department of Planning and Sustainability, to be exact, for all of their support in helping us with a successful rezoning of this property. Next slide. So for the master plan, we established goals specific to Kensington Station that aligned with MARTA's TOD guidelines and policies. Our ultimate goal was to secure rezoning, which we did, but there were other goals that I will just highlight. We wanted to encourage a mixed-use walkable environment. We want to definitely make sure that there are housing choices at different price points. You know, our goal of 20% of affordable units within any TOD where there is a residential component. And then we wanted to just continue our efforts in increasing ridership and generating revenue for MARTA, as well as improve multi-mobility access to and from the station. Next slide, please. So Kensington Station itself has long been envisioned as a regional center, and the site and contextual conditions can support that. This vision began many years ago over many plans for the station and the surrounding areas. Next slide. So as we were going through the actual master planning process, DeKalb County was nearing the completion of their comprehensive plan, the DeKalb Unified Plan, where within that planning document, Kensington Station was defined as a regional activity center again. And the master plan that we created, we wanted to make sure that it aligned with the characteristics as outlined in DeKalb's Unified Plan, which it has. Next slide, please. Kensington Station sits between major destinations in the Atlanta region. You got the Atlanta, you got Decatur rather, Stone Mountain, and I-285, and they are all mainly connected by Memorial Drive and the MARTA Blue Line. And we know that the station can become a destination, but it can also become an important connecting piece for surrounding neighborhoods and the existing and planned trail network by providing new streets and trail connections within that TOD. Next slide. So we conducted an extensive site analysis, which helped determine areas of the site that may be the easiest to develop in near term. The areas in orange are the easiest to develop because these areas are flat and it's where our surface parking lots are. The areas in blue are the second easiest, but there are some constraints as a result of topography, tree coverage, and then in the case of the area along Covington Highway, we do have to contend with some major power transmission lines. The area in yellow are the most difficult to develop because of their size, current uses, as well as they span the tracks. This slide here also points out, if you guys recall, we have our very first TOD at Kensington Station will be south of Kensington on what we call off-site property. Kensington Point, that's a relationship that MARTA has created with the Housing Authority of DeKalb County, where they will introduce 250 units of both affordable senior and workforce housing, as well as their new headquarters. I think it's around 25,000 square feet. Currently, just directly south of the station, Phoenix Station is under construction, where we'll have 240 units just south of the station. Next slide. So we used multiple engagement methods. We met people where they were. We had a variety of input opportunities throughout the process, including in-person and virtual events and online activities that mimic really all of our in-person activities throughout the planning process. So we had a very robust community engagement opportunity for the community that we were really pleased with. Next slide. And next slide. So here are just some photos from the grand opening of Station Soccer. We had an opportunity to have a pop-up where we shared with the community really introduced them to the master planning process that we were beginning to undertake, and to just build up the excitement about future TOD at the station. Next slide. Here are some images from the MARTA Market in September. We actually had a community meeting here at the station, and we were really pleased with the level of turnout and the comments and feedback that we received from the community during this event. Next slide. All of our input and review of previous plans centered around 5 themes. We wanted to make walking and biking easier in and around the station, add public green space, offer a variety of housing types and make them affordable and mixed income, add quality retail and restaurants, including daily essentials, and just build a walkable mixed-use community as a destination to our Kensington Station. Next slide. So given the feedback we heard, the site conditions, we imagine this station as a neighborhood gathering place. We've established a set of design parameters which were included in our zoning conditions. So as we move forward with TOD, our development partner will definitely have to adhere to those conditions that were established within the zoning that we currently have at the station. Next slide. So our design parameters, I'm not going to read through all of these, but I'll just highlight a few things. Obviously, we want to create a connected street network, improve pedestrian and bike access, redesign the current stormwater detention pond into a usable public space, make it easier to access the bus bay from the street. Next slide. And I will end here by saying including a permanent location for Station Soccer within the redevelopment. So when TOD comes online, Station Soccer will always have a home at our Kensington Station. Next slide. While the parameters do give some guidance about the look and feel of the TOD, we also needed to consider real market conditions. So through the market analysis that we have, we looked at the development potential for the next 5 to 8 years. And overall, more than 600 units could be built at the site today, obviously with the anticipation of next phases introducing even more units. Also, the site could support some 50,000 square feet of commercial space, focused on services, coffee shops, pharmacy, and restaurants. And using the design parameters and market study, we developed 3 concept plans, which will give MARTA and our future development partners some flexibility for how to accomplish TOD at the station. And in general, they all have pretty much the same yield and results. For instance, each concept can yield around 1,500 residential units at complete build-out. Next slide, please. We also created 3 street and land use frameworks. So the solid lines shows the street network. The dashed blue line is the pedestrian access, and then the purple line is our bus access point. Next slide. So diving a little bit into the concept plan, I'll start with the concept 1. This concept is organized around a town green just north of the station. On the north side, you're seeing multifamily with ground level retail surrounding it. And on the south side, along Kensington Road, we've introduced a MARTA patron parking deck with some retail surrounding it. We've also included an expanded 2-way bus bay, and then the small bus waiting area for our bus patrons. And finally, I just want to point out the storm water park. You see, in this particular concept, we've actually have the park itself being anchored by the station soccer. And then there's trails and overlooks connecting directly to the rest of the site. Concept 2, next slide, please. So the second concept is also organized around the town green. This is slightly a larger town green, and it's a different shape if you can see that, but it's still surrounded by retail and multifamily buildings and the station. The southern and western edge of the site remains the same, and again on the north side we're showing the stormwater park where you have station soccer being relocated and anchoring that. Next slide. The final concept 3, our final concept here, it actually centers on the street network around the station and the existing parking layout. One difference is that the plan keeps the station soccer in its current location, and another difference is that you'll see that we don't have quite the number of parking decks that we had in concepts 1 and 2. Again, the southern side of the station stays the same as in the previous concepts. Next slide. So a little bit about parking. So all of the plans meet a range of parking needs such as MARTA patron parking, residential unit parking, retail, and Uber and Lyft drop-offs. This is done through on-street parking where appropriate, shared parking decks throughout the site, and then the MARTA patron parking deck. The MARTA patron parking deck, I just want to point out, is that we've created a concept that would support or have 400 spaces, and that would just play a role in helping to provide the needed replacement parking. But know that MARTA patron parking will be dispersed throughout the TOD. Next slide. This is the one part of the concept that truly I'm thrilled about, is because we work very closely with our bus planning and operations team to look at bus service here. So MARTA is always seeking to expand bus service at Kensington, given the demand we know from the surrounding communities. Each plan leaves the bus loop, or the bus bay, I guess I should say, in the same location as it is today. Because the connections just work great. You know, our patrons are able to exit the bus and just go straight to the train platform. In this concept, however, we've removed the bus loop, and it becomes a two-way street. It allows for buses to enter from 2 directions as well as leave from 2 directions onto Kensington Road. Currently, we have 6 bays. With this configuration, we will create the opportunity for 10 or 11 bays with a pedestrian crossing area. And then you'll have plaza and rideshare areas provided for bus patrons to wait. And people who that may just drive to the station or get dropped off, they will then also have direct access to the bus bay and another way to enter the station and take the train. Next slide. So here we really wanted to give you guys a chance to see an eye-level view of what some of all of this could really look like. This image illustrates how the town green could look, and that's on the north side of the station. It would be surrounded by mixed-use buildings, a little retail as shown in the background. The town green includes a special event lawn, community pavilion, and integrated stormwater management landscape area. This particular image, if you can see, actually shows a band performing in the background and families just enjoying their afternoon. Next slide. This rendering shows the relocated station soccer that I mentioned earlier that's anchoring the stormwater park in the background. You can see seating where parents can watch their kids play soccer, and then you have overlooks and trails connecting down to the stormwater park. Next slide. This is a streetscape facing north from Kensington Road, just west of the bus bay and MARTA parking garage. The retail connected to the garage could include some outdoor seating and plaza, and the retail on the other side of the street, you see where it says pharmacy, there's residential atop that, could include some daily essential uses like a pharmacy. The bus bay is shown in the background, and the street to the left is an additional point of ingress and egress for buses. Next slide. So the entire plan can be found at kensingtonmartaplan.com, and I would just want to share what's next for us. We will be asking DeKalb County to adopt this plan as a supplement to their unified plan, kind of as a small area plan for the Kensington station. It would occur as a text amendment. And then by doing this, this opens up opportunities for us to seek federal funding. So that's really important for us. And then in the very, very near future, we are looking to release the RFP for the first phase of TOD here at the station. And I'm hoping that it will hit the street next month. Next slide. Thank you.
All right, are there any questions? Mr. Frierson.
Yeah, I want to say I'm so excited about what's happening in this space, I would have to agree that there's been a lot of community input and involvement in helping shaping the feel of this particular space, and we want to thank you for all that's happening, and we want to say thank you for your leadership, Ms. Franks. It was wonderful to see this happening. This is just one TOD project that we're going to have across our landscape. And I think DeKalb County is going to really be proud of what's going to happen out of this space. So thank you.
Okay. Mayor Floyd.
Thank you. I have continued to be impressed with the involvement of your group in transit-oriented development around the area. What are the density levels according to this plan?
So this plan at complete build-out, we could accommodate, say, 1,500 residential units. So we're probably, the zoning itself will support up to 12 stories. And for us starting out, we're looking at the stretch along Kensington Road. So we probably will find ourselves anywhere between 15, I would say probably 5 to 6 story structures to mimic what's happening on the south side of Kensington Road. But when we get on the north side of the station, I'm certain, because this is a regional center, that the county and MARTA will want to try to push that envelope to truly maximize the density opportunity here at the station.
Okay, this was a MU something.
MU5.
And where the development is going on right now is a HR2. How do those two differ?
So the real difference is the level. Well, H is for housing, so it's more of a residential focus. The mixed use allows for and really supports more non-residential activity, and it's just based on the amount that should be coming along.
Okay, and then I noticed on one of these drawings, what you call a park plaza, what is that?
So it's just, it could be, you know, like, just pavers of a plaza area where people can hang out, you know, wait for pickup.
And I'm curious, I've been watching the Avondale development progress around there. I mean, have you done do we have any numbers on the usage of that parking deck by MARTA patrons
At Avondale?
at Avondale?
We have not generated any numbers ourselves, but you know, we can check with our development partner to see. We know that, you know, since the pandemic, things have not, utilization is down across the board, but I can say we're seeing an uptick in it overall.
It seems to me to be used a lot.
Okay,
Now, because the surface lots on the other side of the train over there, they still get very little usage, it seems to me. But I mean, I don't know whether they're MARTA patrons or just, but those parking decks are certainly being used by people who are not living in those apartments there. They're used by somebody else. So that's the reason I was curious as to maybe we ought to do some analysis there.
Yeah.
As to what that is.
And there's more that our parking team is exploring, because one of the things that, you know, we're bringing back long-term parking here at Kensington, but that's something that we're exploring at all of our stations when we're going in master planning for TOD. And with that comes controlled access points similar to what you would have here at Lindbergh. There are not any controlled access points at Avondale or Edgewood Candler Park in those shared parking decks. And so to your point, Mayor Floyd, there are probably people using the spaces there that are not patrons or living in the development.
Okay, and I guess the last question I'll ask is, we approved a locally preferred alternative for the arterial transit up Candler Road, and it turns on Memorial Drive and comes to the Avondale station. Am I remembering that right? We did pass that, didn't we? Didn't we do that?
Carrie, we did, yeah.
Am I remembering that right? So, but, and one of the questions I asked during that, and it may have been a briefing we got on it, was if they looked at bringing that arterial, instead of turning and going to Avondale, they looked at bringing it into the Kensington station. And I'm wondering if that ever came up. And I'm not suggesting you do that, but it would seem to me if I'd been involved in this plan, I would have said, why don't we bring that bus line down here and look at it as roads? And I don't know, maybe there's a way to run it both ways or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, I know that our bus planning and operations team has something in mind, because they've requested, you know, that our bus bays increase from 6 to 10 or 11. I'm just not certain on the routes that would actually be coming in. And that was all based on what they know is demand.
Okay, I'll ask if you've involved the city of Avondale Estates in this.
Yes.
At all. I know it's not in, they don't own any, they're not involved in any of this property, but they're certainly right next to it.
Oh, yeah. And I'll tell you, during our conversation with them, it was really about connectivity. Getting connectivity from Avondale Estates to the station, and their desire to work closely with DeKalb County in doing that. And I think they're actually exploring funding opportunities on some things as well.
Okay, I would encourage you to ask them to at least pass a resolution or something acknowledging that they see the plan. They might appreciate that, and they certainly will have some opinions. It may not be otherwise.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you, Deb.
Oh,
Appreciate
thank you.
it.
Ms. Jones.
Thank you, Ms. Frank. Always looking forward to seeing a great TOD development. On slide 9, there was mention of the level of density, including education, but I did not see that anywhere else in the slide. So can you talk a little bit more about anticipation of having some type of educational facility either on the TOD property or around it? Because I know people would love to be able to have easy access to drop their children off at school or daycare if possible. And then also, can you explain to me a little bit more about the 400 parking spaces? I know you said they were for MARTA patrons, but then and just in your conversation, you also mentioned residential, so is that the total parking,
Yeah.
including that shared space?
Yeah, and I probably glossed over that. One of the things that we have to do when we have a station like this with such a sizable amount of parking, we have to look at its utilization, knowing that it's not an end-of-the-line station. We're actually master planning right now for Indian Creek, but it functions as an end-of-the-line station, especially during events and different things like that. So our parking guys really wanted to make sure we recognize that. And one of the ways that we thought that we could quickly come in and introduce patron replacement parking on the front end was identifying the opportunity for a 400 space parking deck. But additional, that's not meeting all the MARTA patron parking needs. It would then be dispersed as with other TODs within the parking decks throughout the site. So at the end of it all, I can't tell you the exact number of spaces, but know that it will be more than 400, Ms. Jones. And then in terms of the educational piece, I will say that, you know, this is just a kind of a vision as to where we could go, but I'm certain that as we get down into it, hearing from the community again, knowing that there's a need, I am certain that there would be interest in exploring other facilities. For instance, at our Edgewood Candler Park, you know, there's Moving in the Spirit is located in that facility. So we call those kind of our social infrastructure activities. MARTA Market is here at Kensington. I know that would be something that the community would want to stay. Station Soccer, as I mentioned earlier. So we will definitely explore other community needs that would be a great fit for that particular TOD.
And I just wanted to clarify, I'm not asking for more parking spaces.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Ms.
All
Frank.
right, thank you.
All right, if there are no other matters to come before the Planning and Capital Programs Committee meeting, I will adjourn. All right, thank you.
Everybody should be checked in. Okay. First item of agenda is to approve the May 25th minutes. Could I get a motion and a second, please? All right, I see moved by Hardage. Where's Tyreen when we need her? All right. Okay, seconded by Floyd. Any discussion, questions, additions? Not, could we please vote? The motion passes. The next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for office furniture, and that'll be led by George Wright, our Chief Operating Officer. George?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Pond. For those that I haven't met, again, my name is George Wright. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for MARTA, and today I'm actually pinch hitting for our Director of Facilities, Mr. Sean Thomas, who couldn't be here today. Next slide, please. This contract will allow us to consolidate furniture purchases authority-wide from multiple manufacturers and distributors. Next slide, please. With this approach, the authority expects to realize improved efficiencies and indirect cost savings because we're going to be able to accomplish the previously board-approved HQ annex relocation, fulfill life cycle furniture replacement, and create office space improvements under this one single procurement vehicle. Regarding forecasted spend allocations, we are forecasting about $1.2 million to furnish and equip the Uptown Towers lease space. We're looking at $400K to furnish space here in the headquarters building where staff will be relocating to. We're looking at about $500,000 for the recurring life cycle replacements of furniture and about $1 million for space improvements under this contract. Next slide, please. This is kind of a conceptual representation of the product and solutions we're going to be able to realize with this contract. I would like to direct your attention to the, I guess, the picture on the left side of the slide. This is a solution that we will probably employ for the first time, where we're going to be able to do some less evasive type of modifications to workspace, especially when you consider the location across the street. I think this is especially relevant when we talk about we've got staff members that are working a hybrid remote schedule, so this will certainly facilitate and lend itself to the sharing of office space. Next slide, please. Here's a listing of the suppliers that are going to be a part of this contract, and I would like to spotlight the firm CBI, Contract Business Interiors. They are a local firm. We have done business with them for over 15 years, and they are, in fact, a certified DBE. Next slide, please. This contract will be funded with 100% local capital funds from the fiscal year 24 budget, and funds for subsequent fiscal years will be included in subsequent annual budgets. Therefore, I would like to respectfully request that this committee recommend to the full board the approval of the resolution for contract RFPP P50306 for an award amount of up to $3 million for the base term of 2 years. Please forgive the error on the slide here. And that corresponds to what's in the agenda report, Chairman Pond. Thank you, and Mr. Pond, I return the matter to you for consideration.
Thank you, George. So we have a motion and a second. Moved by Powers, seconded by Hardage. Any discussion? Yes, Ms. Jones.
Is this replacing current equipment, and if so, what is the life cycle of that furniture, and where is it going?
I do not know what I'm sorry, I have to get back to you on the, useful life or the life cycle of furniture. This furniture would be going to the lease space across the street, so we have a significant number of staff that are going to be relocating from our annex facility. So it's going to be used to furnish that lease space there. We also have staff that will be relocating from the annex into this building, and, we would need to, furnish, the accommodations there also.
George, I have one question. These GSA schedules, just for clarification for myself and others, these GSA schedules, the low unit price is already established, so those specific prices, say for a certain kind of chair, are already established to go to one vendor, correct?
Or various vendors, so if you...
But those low prices are already established?
Yes, and they've already determined the fairness
Because they submit
and
those
reasons.
on the
Yes.
GSA schedules. Any other questions? Not, could we please vote? The motion passes. The next item is a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for automated defibrillators, and that'll be led by Gina Majors, Deputy Chief of Safety and Quality Assurance. Gina?
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Pond, Vice Chairman Floyd, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Wright, and members of the Operations and Safety Committee. I'm Gina Major, Deputy Chief of Safety and Quality Assurance, and may I direct your attention to item number 3. This is a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for automated external defibrillators, IFB B50276. Next slide. Automated external defibrillators, or AEDs, are used in response to sudden cardiac arrest events. They analyze the cardiac rhythm of the patient and determine if an electrical shock should be delivered. We currently have 118 AEDs across our rail stations, police vehicles, administrative and maintenance facilities. And a couple months ago in April, DSQA came before this committee to present a modification to our existing contract as a gap fill until this contract could be awarded and executed. Next slide, please. So this contract will provide Zoll fully automatic AEDs to the authority. We will replace existing aged AEDs, ensure all police vehicles have an AED, and provide a stock of AEDs for replacement purposes. The contract enables us to purchase replacement cabinets, signs, batteries, pads, and other related AED accessories. The contractor will also conduct monthly inspections of all AEDs to ensure they are rescue ready and replace batteries and pads before expiration. They will also track our devices in compliance in an online database that is accessible by our EHS staff and other designated MARTA employees. The contractor also provides medical oversight for the program and does return to service maintenance after an AED is used. The contract also provides monitoring systems for our cabinets and AEDs that are in publicly accessible areas like our rail stations. The device is pictured here. It monitors the cabinet door and the AED itself. If the door opens or the AED moves, an audible alarm goes off and an alert is sent. We're planning to have that alert sent to our police communications center. This system should also allow us to move our rail station AEDs back into the public areas. The system, combined with daily monitoring by operations, will hopefully decrease theft of the AEDs. Next slide, please. The contract has a 1-year base and 4 option years. It is funded by local capital funds. A DBE goal was not set for this contract. There are no DBEs for this type of equipment and services in the directory. MARTA received 3 bids from AED Brands LLC, Thompson Safety LLC, and US Imaging Inc. Next slide. AED Brands submitted the lowest bid and was determined to be a responsive and responsible bidder. Their bid came to a total of $738,000, or just over $738,000 for all 5 years of the contract. The costs are broken down as shown here. The base term is more costly because of the need to replace aged AEDs, purchase additional AEDs for police, and create a stock of these devices. Next slide. I respectfully request the approval of the resolution authorizing the award of a contract for automated external defibrillators, IFB B50276, to AED Brands LLC. Thank you for your time, Chairman Pond. I now turn it back over to you for consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Major. Could we have a motion on the second? Moved by Floyd, second by Hartage. Any questions, discussion? If not, could we please vote? The motion passes. And you're on again.
I
The
am.
next item is a briefing on MARTA bus collisions by Gina Major again.
Thank you. All right. Next slide, please. This briefing will take an in-depth look at our bus collision data, how we've turned that data into information, and how we've put that information into action. Next slide. In looking at our bus collision data, we will first look at trends both pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Next slide. This slide is one of the KPI metrics on bus collisions that's provided in the monthly board packets. Now, Chairman Pond astutely noted the uptick in bus collisions and inquired about the rise seen in recent months. I'm starting with this slide because while it shows a notable increase in bus collisions, the increase is wholly post-pandemic, February 2022 to February 2023. And it is represented by collisions per 100,000 miles. On the next slide, we will look at collisions both pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and post-pandemic. Next slide. And here we are with a look at bus collisions pre-pandemic, during, and post-pandemic. This slide represents June 2018 through April 2023. The lowest point is April 2020, when virtually the entire country was shuttered, with the exception of first responders and emergency travel. But in short, what this slide shows is that our collision rate post-pandemic closely resembles or mirrors pre-pandemic activity. We see seasonal highs and lows associated with holidays and summer months. The same peaks and lows in the collision rate seen before the pandemic are reflected afterwards. We do know that current traffic patterns are nearly back to pre-pandemic levels according to most traffic pundits and a recently published news article that looked specifically at Atlanta traffic. We also have a less experienced pool of bus operators post-pandemic. That is likely a contributing factor, but as I'll show in the remainder of this briefing, is not the primary factor. Next slide. So in looking at bus collisions, it's important to first know that each collision is graded to determine if there were any actions that could have been taken by the bus operator to prevent the collision from occurring. Each collision is graded as either preventable or non-preventable. The grading is actually done by the Office of Safety and is independent of any citations issued by jurisdictional police or fault liability. Preventability is not to be confused with fault or liability, but rather to ensure that our operators are employing defensive driving techniques at all times. With that being said, a preventable collision is any occurrence involving an authority-owned vehicle that results in property damage or personal injury, regardless of who was injured, what property was damaged, to what extent or where it occurred, in which the authorized driver in question failed to do everything they could have reasonably have done to prevent it. A non-preventable collision is any occurrence of a collision in which everything that could have been reasonably done, including compliance with policies, procedures, and known training materials, was adhered to in order to prevent the collision, but the collision or the incident still occurred. Overall, about 60% of our bus collisions are non-preventable. Next slide. So a deeper dive into the data shows that there are three primary types of collisions: side swipes, collisions with fixed objects, and rear-end collisions. These three collision types accounted for 1,044 of the 1,180 collisions that have occurred fiscal year to date. The first data set in blue shows the top three collisions inclusive of both preventable and non-preventable collisions. The orange data set breaks out those collisions that were non-preventable, and the data set in yellow shows those that were preventable. We see in the blue box that nearly half of all collisions that occur in our system are side swipes. It's 573 out of the 1180. And then the orange box tells us that 80% of those side swipes are not preventable by our operators. We also see that most rear-end collisions are not preventable, and these rear ends is where the bus is being rear-ended. The preventable ones are where the bus rear-ended someone. But most preventable accidents that occur, as shown in the yellow data set, are actually collisions with fixed objects. Next slide, please. All right, data to information. Now that we've looked at the data trends, we will look at how we've turned that data into information. And as I get into this information, I want to acknowledge the work of our Research and Analysis Group Department, which is headed by Dr. Rob Goodwin, who I think he's here. His Director of Strategic Performance and Data Management, Sue Yap, and their entire team that have worked tirelessly with us to put together this extensive information. Next slide. So for those top three collision types, side swipes, rear ends, and collisions with fixed objects, we've put together profiles of what does that typical collision look like. For side swipes, they typically happen on Route 110, which is Peachtree Road, and Route 4, which is Moreland Avenue. They're non-preventable, as discussed, typically around 4 o'clock on Mondays and Fridays, and there were a vehicle passes on the left side of the bus in the same direction. Our rear end profile, we see those typically happening on Route 115, which is Covington Highway. Again, non-preventable around 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursdays where the bus is ahead. And then our collisions with fixed objects profile, those tend to happen on Route 95, which is Metropolitan Parkway. Those, again, are preventable, typically occur in the mornings around 6 a.m. on Mondays. Next slide, please. So those were the collision profiles. We're now going to look at the top 21 locations or hotspots and the characteristics of those hotspots. Next slide. So we wanted to take a deeper dive into the bus collision data to determine if collisions are occurring in certain areas or locations. In doing so, we opened our window of time back to January of 2022 rather than just fiscal year to date. So we plotted the location of all collisions using their lat-long coordinates as shown here on the heat map on the left. We then created a quarter-mile radius around each collision and were able to determine that there were 21 areas where 11 or more bus collisions had occurred in a quarter-mile radius. 17 of those 21 were in the city of Atlanta, and 4 were outside in DeKalb County. Next slide. All right, so focusing on those 21 hotspots, we then looked at all the factors. We looked at preventability, we looked at collision type, and we also looked at the operator average years of service. So focusing attention to the left of this slide, there's no surprise in seeing that within these hotspots, the top collisions are still side swipes. Given that most side swipes are non-preventable, we also don't see a huge correlation with operator years of service. However, on the whole, and you'll see in the chart at the bottom, operators with less years of service have experienced more collisions within these hotspots, as shown in the bottom table. Equally, and perhaps even more important, and we'll focus attention on the right side here, we looked at the location characteristics surrounding these hotspots. When we looked deeper into the characteristics of the top hotspots, we found that they were all within proximity of our rail stations, where most of our bus routes begin or end, and therefore they involve multiple routes within that dense quarter-mile area. And so I'll just talk about a few of these. I won't talk about all of them, but the number one hotspot characteristic occurring around West End Station, again, a very tight quarter-mile radius. However, there's about, I think, 8 or 9 bus routes that are involved, typically occurring around Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard and Joseph E. Lowry Boulevard. No surprise, 5 Point Station, given what I've just shared, is a hotspot, again, with multiple routes. Those collisions occurring around Alabama Street, Forsyth, and Mitchell Street. Hotspots 3 and 4, and I'm going to go into Route 4 a little bit more, but occurring down Moreland Avenue and around Inman Park Station. Mostly on Route 4. Route 4 actually spans 4 of the top 7 hotspots. And then the similar characteristics on hotspot number 5 that we see in 1 and 2 occurring around King Station with multiple routes. Next slide, please. So while we talked about the characteristics of those hotspots, there are a couple routes that deserve some attention, one being Route 10 on Peachtree Road. Route 110 appears in 4 of the top hotspots. And a picture being worth 1,000 words, we wanted to show and share how narrow the lanes are on Peachtree Road for Route 110 and how difficult it is for the operators to have to navigate. So you'll see the pictures, the first 2 pictures on the left showing the front of the bus with a very narrow amount of room to navigate between the white lines. And then you see on the next picture, the rear of the bus, where the tire is actually touching the right line as the bus is driving off. Similar pictures, just a different location along the route on the right two pictures. Again, very tight navigation for our bus operators. Next slide. And then this is also just a couple more on Route 10. You see we've got a pole located very close to the curb, and this is where a bus operator is needing to either pick up or drop off a passenger. Again, you can see on the picture to the right, the back tire of the bus touching the white line. Next slide. All right, and then with Route 4 didn't have quite the same challenges as Route 110 with regard to the spacing of the lanes. They're a little bit wider lanes, not much, but a little bit wider lanes on Route 4. But one of the things is that on Route 4 and Moreland Avenue is that it's very congested during peak periods of time. And what we're showing here, particularly on all of these pictures, but particularly on the right side, is the placement of one of our bus stops right before a business and right after an intersection. So it's right after an intersection, a lighted intersection, and right before a business. So it would encourage drivers to want to go around the bus to the left, causing a side swipe, and potentially turn in front of the bus if the driver's impatient to get into that business. Now, these type of findings we are looking to improve or mitigate and see if there's a better place that we can place that particular stop. Next slide. So looking to take that information and turn it into action, we've developed a back to basics action plan to address the top 3 collision types. We developed a hazard identification reporting campaign to address collisions with fixed objects, because we're looking at what can we potentially control better or faster. We developed a public outreach campaign, or are working on developing a public outreach campaign with jurisdictional stakeholders to look at improving road conditions and collaboration in addressing the characteristics around the hotspot locations, and a visibility warning type campaign to reduce rear ends. Next slide. So our first action was a safety hazard reporting campaign to address collisions with fixed objects. Again, these were the ones that were found to be preventable. Next slide. We piloted a 6-month hazard reporting campaign to raise awareness of bus route hazards and encourage reporting by our bus operators. We wanted to give them a voice, and we actually wanted to reward reporting through incentives. We also wanted to remove or mitigate the hazards that were reported. The dates of the campaign were from September 2022 through April 2023. There were 49 hazards that were reported and mitigated. We had 30 operators who participated. Many participated multiple times. We paid out $4,750 to 15 winners. Next slide. Our next action will include a public outreach campaign with jurisdictional stakeholders, such as the City of Atlanta, DeKalb County, and the Georgia Department of Transportation, to collaborate on road improvements and enforcement of safety and penalties around those non-preventable collisions with our buses. Next slide. Lastly, we're looking at a campaign that targets messaging to drivers and the overall visibility of our buses. This can perhaps be done through signage in the hotspot areas around our stations, as well as bus wraps. Next slide. And then in addition to the Back to Basics Action Plan, MARTA is also evaluating the Mobileye Collision Avoidance System. This is a system that continuously monitors the road ahead and warns the driver a few seconds before a potential collision. We just completed a 6-month pilot and are currently evaluating the benefits versus the cost. Next slide. Thank you for your time. Chairman Pine, I now turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Majors. That was a very detailed report, your analysis, and one of the most thorough that I've observed. So thank you again for your team and your work in this.
Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Major? Yes, Ms. Jones.
Thank you for the report. Just I guess a point of information. A lot of the streets that were listed on this report are also considered to be high injury network streets in the city of Atlanta that have the highest rates of deaths and fatalities and crashes. So not really surprising to see this information. So it may be an interesting data point for your team.
Thank you.
I have one question. Could you elaborate? I don't remember the terminology, but you had 15 operators awarded $4,700 plus. What are they identifying? Could you just summarize
Sure.
what
So,
that content?
yes. The number one non-preventable collision type was collisions with fixed objects. So you saw one of the pictures, a pole being very close to the street. If there was a bump to that, that would be a collision with fixed object. We have a lot of tree branches overhanging, other things that the operators may see, but just get into their day-to-day and don't necessarily report. So we wanted to incentivize them and encourage them. So for every hazard that was reported, the operator got a ticket, like a drawing, and we had a raffle every month. So you report a hazard, it's like you get a ticket into the drawing. First place was $500, then $250, and I think $100 after that. But we wanted to get operators mostly comfortable and try to create a habit of reporting the hazards that they were seeing out on the streets.
That is a great program because the people on the ground see that when you wouldn't necessarily. So, Mr. Floyd.
Yeah, I'd still like to see the cost associated, and I'm not talking about injury cost. I'm talking about repair cost as a result of these numbers, and also the hours lost because of these accidents. And I guess there's some scrapes and stuff that we ignore and continue to operate the bus, or if we try to, and if a bus has got, like my car's got a scrape on it, I'll drive it 6 months before I get fixed if there's some, but the cost is the main thing. Just how much we're spending, how much cost us on an annual basis to repair damage due to specifically to avoidable collisions, but probably both. So.
I do have a little bit of claim information. I don't have with me repair information, but I do have, and again, these numbers are a little tempered pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, but we spent about $13 million in claims in 2019, a little over or almost $15 million in claims for fiscal year 2020. I'm sorry, that was fiscal year 2019 and fiscal year 2020. Those numbers are muted for 2021 and 2022. Right now, we're at just over 6 million and just over 4 million. But as I'm sure you can understand, like claims take a while before they're fully settled. So we do expect the claims for those 2 years to settle out higher, but not what we saw in fiscal year 2019 and 2020. And then for fiscal year 23, it's still too early to know where we're going to be.
Okay, only other comment I make is if you run into a Georgia Power pole, I suggest you send them a bill for it.
Yes, sir.
It's a great point, Mayor Floyd. We will get those numbers to you in terms of what the maintenance program costs for those kinds of dings. And then the other thing I think you were making is, You know, if we wreck a mirror on a post, that bus comes out of service because it's a safety critical thing. So there's also the service cost to not being able to provide that service until that bus gets back out there. So we'll pull that together.
Ms. Scott?
Yes, my question is, when a incident or a hazard is reported by the driver, is there a follow-up process to see if the issue has been resolved?
Yes, ma'am. We do have in this, particularly for our safety campaign, that was built into the campaign itself. But through our regular reporting of our Safety First and Safety Hotline, we do circle back and have a close-the-loop process. Our Safety Hotline allows anonymous or identification reporting. So if an operator identifies themselves, we will follow back up with them. Oftentimes, though, through the hotline, those are kept anonymous.
Then it is the DOT, it depends on whose responsibility it is for the issue as well. If it's a county, a jurisdictional, or DOT itself, or the state.
Or a property, if it's like a tree or something like that, depending on, who's the owner, or who's the jurisdiction, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Frison?
Yeah, Ms. Gina answered my question concerning where this information lands so it can get resolved. There's a number of situations where you could just see a bus going down the street and trees are just low and they're scraping the top of the tree. Those types of things just need to be brought to someone's attention in the jurisdiction so that they can come out and trim. And I think that's really important if you can make that communication happen. All right?
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. You're welcome.
Any other questions? The last item on the agenda is for information only, and that is the April key performance indicators. If there are no other discussion points, we will close the meeting. Thank you.